It's Flashcards Friday, and I'm your host, Gabrielle Birchak. Today's flashcard ties into Tuesday's episode, which looked at many Black female inventors whose recognition was pushed to the margins and even erased. So how did researchers find those women? Deep research. And this episode is about reading with depth and determination to find the accurate sources behind success stories. The pattern is not only that Black female inventors were overlooked, it is also the way the overlooking happens. And as we head into Women's History Month, keep this flashcard handy because checking the margins can change the entire story. But first, a quick word from my advertisers. A lot of scientific great name stories were built the way books are constructed. The headline name appears in the main text. The careful labor, the daily decisions, and sometimes the decisive insight can live in the margins, in the acknowledgments, in the methods, and in lab notebooks. This flashcard is about learning how to see the scaffolding that holds discovery up. So when I do my research, I like to question my findings. I want to share 3 tools with you that you can use as well when you read a success story. Hear it in a podcast, read it in an article, or even see it in a documentary. Flashcard number 1. Who touched the evidence first? When you hear a discovery story, look for the tangible outliers. Ask, who gathered the data? Who ran the apparatus? Who built the instrument? Who coded the pipeline? Or who kept the notebook? Science is made of hands and habits. And in those moments of discovery, someone aligns the mirror, someone recalibrates the sensor, someone labels the samples, or someone notices the anomaly on the 3rd page of a printout when everybody else has gone home. It happens. Here's the simple rule. The more a story sounds like a lightning bolt, the more we should look for the people who are patiently holding the storm in place. Very often, the overlooked contributor is not a stranger to the work. The overlooked contributor is a graduate student, a lab assistant, a technician, a computer, a spouse collaborator, or a co-author whose name is not the one the public learned. When you ask who touched the evidence first, you are learning where discovery actually begins. Flashcard number 2. Where is the work recorded? Ask where the real story lives if you follow the documentation, and ask what would change if you looked at the records instead of the summary. You don't have to become an archivist to do this. Remember that public stories are usually final drafts, and final drafts are always simplified, sometimes for name recognition and sometimes for funding. Here are a few practical places where the margin story often shows up. Look at the author list and notice who is the first and the last author and who is in the middle. Additionally, look for patterns, like who appears across multiple papers without becoming the public face of the work. Alternatively, read the acknowledgments, because that is often where invisible labor becomes briefly visible. Take special note of sentences that start with, "we think," because they sometimes point to the people who did essential work without receiving formal credit. Similarly, read the methods section where the choices live. Methods tell you who had skill, who solved practical problems, and who understood the messy reality behind the clean results. If lab notebooks and correspondence are publicly available, search them. These tangible documents show how decisions were made in real time, show who was present, and who carried the work forward when it became difficult. Finally, the patent record shows when the story involves a device, a process, or a technique. Patents can reveal who was legally credited, who was misnamed, and who was omitted. And if you are using a book as a source, go to the acknowledgments section. If you are referencing a paper, search for the word thank and then read that section with care. This process takes seconds, and it trains your eyes towards the margins. Finally, check the citations. So when you Google an invention, a theory, or a body of research, it often shows up in Wikipedia, where you can find more citations. Dig deep through those citations and read through those that are referenced. And don't just stop there. Oftentimes, those are general references that can lead you to another source that was the primary source of that work. here's an example. When I was researching the history of Hypatia, I kept coming across other works that often cited A. Rome. And I found that not many researchers had taken the time to do any deeper research to find out who A. Rome was. So I took that a step further and I started looking for work on Hypatia that included the citation Rome. It turns out that much of the work historians cite for Hypatia come from a clergyman named Adolphe Rome, as well as from his successors, Joseph Mogenet and Anne Tihon. I wrote a blog about Adolphe Rome, and I will be doing a podcast next Tuesday on this incredible individual. It's quite a story. So be sure to hit subscribe and stay tuned for my little side quest before I fully kick off Women's History Month in March. So when you want to find out whose brain was behind much of the research that you are inquiring about, don't just trust the first citation you find. Dig through those sources because you might find a source that no one else did. Flashcard number 3, who benefited when the story stayed simple? This is the question that keeps the other 2 questions honest. You can ask who gained status, funding, promotions, invitations, and historical immortality when the credit became tidy. You can also ask who became support in the story, even when they were central to the work. Credit is not only a compliment, it is also currency. Credit helps determine who gets grants, who gets lab space, who gets students, who gets cited, and who gets remembered. Once a name becomes the name, that name tends to attract even more credit. The issue is not only bias in a single moment. The problem is also the way reputation compounds over time. This is one reason why the erasure of brilliance can persist across generations. However, consider this. Not every omission is a villain story. Archives can be incomplete. Institutions can be careless with records. Acts of nature, like fires or floods, or acts of man, like war, can inadvertently destroy a single source. A person's role can be described in language that hides their expertise. And for many female scientists, historians, journalists, and authors, a contributor can be treated as help, even when their involvement requires absolute intellectual authority. Invisibility has patterns, and history contains many of them. This matters for Black History and Women's History Months because many women were not absent from discovery, but they were absent from the citations. Many women were present, working, calculating, building, measuring, drafting, testing, and refining. At the same time, someone else became the official face of the story. When you learn to read the margins, when you learn to look in the margins, when you learn to look for the erasures within the margins, you start to notice that progress is rarely a solo act. Progress is usually a network of people making one another possible. So if you want to give these flashcards a go, pick a scientific story you already know. Choose a story that feels complete and neatly packaged, or choose a famous experiment, a major invention, a celebrated theory, or a prize-winning moment. Then run the 3 flashcards, which are 1. Find who touched the evidence first. 2. Retrieve where the work was initially recorded. 3. Obtain who benefited when the story stayed simple, and then look for their supporting help. You might not find a scandal. You might, that would be a good story. But you might find something quieter and more interesting. The network of people behind the headline. If you find a name you've never heard before, write it down and then dig deeper through the citations. Remind yourself that history is not only what happened, but who was remembered and who was forgotten. And if you do find a name that you've never heard before, share it. Reach out to me on the socials or leave a comment here on the podcast and let me know who you found in the margins. Remind yourself that history is not only what happened, but who was remembered and who was forgotten. And as for Tuesday's episode on Black female inventors, the pattern is not just that women were overlooked. The pattern is how the overlooking happens. So as we head into Women's History Month, keep this flashcard handy and keep checking the margins because the story will change. It really will. Thank you for listening to Math Science History. And until next time, carpe diem.